The focus today is AI and VR. I know lots of people here are very interested in VR. So at the end, I would show a clip about using VR to prepare for surgery. And when I went back to Taipei about 5 years ago, and it happened to be one of the local hospitals created by a missionary, George Mackay, and celebrated his 100 years birthday. And 100 years ago, this is the quality of the surgery room. And at the time, the average life expectancy of Taiwanese was about 50 years old. And over the last 100 years, you can see the surgical facility advanced so much in quality, sanitation, in many aspects. But then the question we have to ourselves is 80 years old enough? Can we increase our life from 80 to even higher? So what should we do about it? So let's look at the current paradigm of healthcare. It's a reactive system. So when I'm healthy, I probably wouldn't go to see a doctor because of cost constraint or time constraint. So when I do feel uncomfortable, go into the sub-health situation, then I probably go to make an appointment to see a doctor. And there's a time delay here. And the doctor may ask me to do more tests. So once the test result come back, then the doctor asks me to come back to see him or her again, and the final diagnosis will be performed. And the doctor at this juncture will give me a prescription, and that's it. I pay the bill, then I leave the hospital. If next time I suffer from similar symptoms, I have to start the same process again. There's no feedback loop. So this is current reactive model. So we look at the data and time flow, and look at the time frame, and suppose in time X, I suffer from some situations. In the current paradigm, I will go to hospital to collect some data, doing some lab tests, and do a diagnosis. And it will be desirable if we can have collected a lot of information about the patient already and perform a risk analysis way before the alignment has already happened. And this is pretty much, we like to shift the current paradigm of reactive system into proactive and preventive. I think everybody pretty much understands that. But the gauging factor is cost, right? Suppose we have more data we can collect, and we can do analysis way before the problem happens. Prevention and the proactive action can be taken, and diagnosis can be more precise, and definitely treatment can be also more precise. And in addition to quality, the other problem about healthcare right now is accessibility. So let's look at some data. So there's about 1/3 of world population doesn't have access to quality medical care. And in countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, and doctor inhabitants ratio is 1 to 2,000. Even in the US, when we try to make an appointment with a doctor, primary care doctor, the average waiting time is about 2.5 weeks. So in my case, a couple of years ago, I suffered from chest pain. And this 2.5 weeks is probably too long and very, very, very risky. So let's look at this so-called iron triangle. So we all want to improve quality and accessibility, but cost is a constraint. So if we like to shift paradigm, so when we improving cost and accessibility, the cost wouldn't go up, then we probably would demand disruptive technologies. So let's look at what kind of paradigms we can shift and what kind of technologies are available. And fortunately, in the last about 10 years, we are fortunate to have 3 different technologies become very mature. The first set is IoT devices and the cloud computing. Because of IoT and cloud computing, and the centralized hospital model can be more distributed. So we had a good conversation with the president of Kaiser last year, and he was saying with IoTs and cloud computing, if he can rebuild Kaiser Hospital, he may consider a more distributed model. Like maybe CVS can offload certain functions over there rather than having everybody go to a big building. And with the recent renaissance of AI, and we understand quality doctor, their time may not be scalable. But if AI can facilitate diagnosis and treatment, then perhaps reactive to proactive kind of paradigm shift doesn't require much cost. So this is one example we can visualize. And the healthcare cloud can be virtually everywhere, just like we access Facebook or Google search engine. And patients in any geographic areas, if they can upload their information to the cloud, and doctors in any places can do diagnosis, and the prescription can be dispatched to their home. And of course, to realize this model, we need to have some equipment to collect data at home or in point of care. So this is a device I'm going to talk a little bit in the next few minutes. And this is called Tricorder. So Tricorder is a term coined by a movie series, Star Trek, right? This is Spock wearing like a small cell phone. And this small cell phone can not only do diagnosis, but in the fiction also can do cure. But cure is really far-fetching. But today, diagnosis using a small box like this is already feasible. About 5 years ago, S-Prize Foundation started this Qualcomm Tricorder competition. The requirement, there are two major requirements. One is they require the finishing product must be very lightweight. And the constraint they gave us is 5 pounds. And even if you consider the battery and the power supply themselves amount to about 2 pounds. So 5 pounds is quite challenging. The second challenge is the usage must be very friendly. So even a home user can operate this kind of devices or collecting data in a seamless fashion without guidance. So let's open up the box, already opened here. So you can see there are 5 different components. On the left-hand side, we can conduct blood tests and urine tests. On the right-hand side, we have optical devices. Here, I just pull the base lens out, and you can plug into different lenses for different kind of operation. And this one is has a very long head, very long lens. This is for taking a picture in the inner ear, and we can detect otitis media, in which I will get into slightly more details in about 10 minutes. So we also have a breath sense, and I'm wearing this vital sense. And vital sense, basically, this is a 2-leg ECG measurement. And also there's another wire going to under the armpit to measure temperature. And by also wearing this PPG device, and at the same time you can measure blood saturation, and blood pressure can be measured. So the principle here to measure blood pressure is once the heart pumps, eventually PPG will get an echo. And the duration or the delay can be inverse of a person's blood pressure. And of course, this has to be going through a calibration process because every person's quality of blood vessel and arm length could be different. But the relative high or low is quite reliable. Okay. So a set of devices can cover the following diseases, and it doesn't mean this device can only cover those 15 diseases. And the reason so far we can cover those diseases is because S-Prize Foundation, the competition, requires us to cover those symptoms, diseases. So I'm not going to read them all, but you can see there are 5 vital signs we are required to monitor continuously in a seamless, non-invasive fashion, and detecting different kind of diseases. And taking a sleep disorder as an example. And because when we try to put the device together, we ourselves, we have to go through the traditional system to compare accuracies between our system and the traditional methods. So a sleep disorder, I myself went to hospital to be wired like this gentleman. And it's extremely inconvenient because all the wires need to hook up to the machine. And a nurse told me, if you need to go to the bathroom, you need to press an alarm. And she will come to me and to disconnect all the wires and then reconnect me again. So in the middle of doing this testing, I was really worried about disturbing her. So during the whole night, I didn't sleep well, because I do have an urge to go to the bathroom, but I didn't want to disturb her. So I was diagnosed with sleep disorder, but actually I didn't have sleep disorder. So a non-invasive equipment like this, so if I wear a very lightweight device and wireless, and I can do an equivalent kind of treatment or diagnosis. So let's get into a couple of components. The first one is symptom checker. The purpose of symptom checker is really logical because you don't want a patient to go through all tests. You only want to suggest relevant tests. And so this is like if we go to see a doctor, the doctor will probe us with symptoms. At the end, the doctor may do a diagnosis. If the diagnosis is impossible, the doctor may suggest performing some lab tests. And so the doctor may ask a few questions, whether I have fever, coughing, and so on and so forth. After symptom probing, either diagnosis done or further tests will be suggested. And symptom checking is definitely not new, and there has been quite a few online services in recent years. And Harvard Audit did a survey 2 years ago and published the results in British Medical Journal. And Harvard surveyed 23 different sites. And the average accuracy they estimated for symptom checking is about 34% to 35%. And one shortcoming they enumerate was the user experience was not very good. This is one example site. If you go to the site, when you need to enter your symptom, there's an alphabetic order here, A to Z. You need to click on, let's say, A, then you get into your symptom, then you select a symptom. This is definitely not very user-friendly. And because the user-friendliness is an issue, accuracy is also an issue. So when we started the project, we say, well, AlphaGo seems to be extremely promising. Why not employing the same kind of algorithm to try to do cure? So I think most of people probably know the foundation of AlphaGo success. So it's reinforcement learning is beneath AlphaGo to try to learn information from the data. So basically, there are 4 components here. Agent here is a doctor, reinforcement learning agent here is a robot doctor, and the environment is the patient, and the patient has its state. The state is the predicted diseases in the current situation. Then the agent can take action. In our case, we'll be doing symptom probing, asking questions. And we have a reward here. Reward here, there are 3 values. One is, if the prediction is accurate, of course, there's a positive Hansen reward. If the prediction is wrong, and it's negative. And every time the agent asks a question, because we don't want the agent to ask too many questions, right? So the smaller number of questions the agent asks, the more user-friendly the system can be. So additional question asked, we deduct 1 or 2 points. And some people may say, well, AlphaGo has been very successful. We can probably just directly plug into AlphaGo's value network and the policy network. So you must be very familiar with the function of the two. The key values of policy network is once you have obtained training data, you train the policy network, then you can perturb your policy network to do further exploration. So in the AlphaGo scenario, in early days, they collected 60,000 kind of training samples, and they trained their policy network and value networks. But certain ingenious moves are not really in the training data. So what they can do is they can perturb their policy network to do different moves, do exploration. So one example here, if you know, are familiar with the Go, is in 300 years, people do not position their stone in the fifth line in the beginning. Because fifth line is really hard to defend. It's like near the center of this board. So positioning the fifth line is forbidden. It's a very bad move. But AlphaGo, it played with itself. It found out the fifth line actually could be a very productive move. In the second game, playing with this Korean chess player, it actually plays on the fifth line and won the game. So can we do the same when we do our symptom checking training? The answer is probably not. There are 3 differences between AlphaGo and some real-world applications. The first difference is input to AlphaGo to a game is deterministic. So even, let's say, AlphaGo has this 19 by 19 kind of checkerboard grid, but when a person positions a stone, and that's actually a very certain motion. So it's countable discrete actions. But in symptom checking, even we want to describe our symptoms, the number of symptoms can be quite large, and symptom can be continuous value. And even symptoms today, they say, I have a headache, right? How to quantify headache. And there are certain symptoms we don't even know how to articulate. So the input space is complex. And output for AlphaGo is pretty straightforward, either win or lose. It's binary. For symptom checking, we have 800 potential diseases by CDC, and symptom checking may predict 2 or 3 because at the same time a person may have multiple diseases. And the output is definitely in higher complexity. And finally, as just I mentioned, in AlphaGo scenario, in the game scenario, you can ask the training process to explore the space. Not only just exploiting the existing knowledge, but also exploring unknown spaces. But in the medical scenario, suppose I have cold today, I cannot ask doctor, or doctor wouldn't give me arsenic because it's against the law, right? The doctor will be sent to prison. So there's no avenue to experiment with different medicines with with patients unless you go through a very rigorous IRB process. Okay, so how do we solve the problem then? The problem space seems to be very large, exponentially large. So we employ a method, divide and conquer. So we say, well, why not divide this symptom checking into at least 2 levels? At the higher level, we have a hospital's dean. And then once a question has been received, he can dispatch a question to different departments, and he can make a decision. He's like a master agent, employ several different department hospital agents. So in the picture form, you can see this is our dean of the hospital. And once the patient responds with the symptom checking, symptom probing, the doctor can refer the question or the answer to certain departments. And then this department heads can suggest the next question. And according to the response from the patient, the dean can forward to other departments. So once this process has been iterated for a few iterations, and the decision can be made. And the benefit of doing so is to reduce the problem space for every single parts or every single department. Aggregatedly, the accuracy has improved quite drastically. The second consideration is definitely we want to consider context. Because for example, who is critical because certain diseases, women wouldn't get it, or certain diseases, men wouldn't get it. And in addition, genetic information, medical history, those are definitely critical. And where and when are definitely logically important. Like in this season in California, we should consider cold and flu may have higher probability than in the summer, right? So once after we consider context and also using this hierarchical learning method, we improve the accuracy from Harvard's survey of 35% to initially 50%. 50% is when we haven't done this hierarchical learning, just one level. And after we have done this hierarchical, improved to 63%. And considering context, the accuracy right now is 76%. And 76% in medicine is nothing to be celebrated. It's actually a disaster. It's actually saying 24% you may be sued, right? So we actually launched the application, but not for diagnosis. We launched an application for making appointment. So end of last year, we launched in 2 different hospitals through a dialogue like Line, WhatsApp, or Messenger, and we can have a dialogue with patients. At the end, we would suggest maybe you should make an appointment with internal medicine department or the dermatologist. And the other function we can provide for hospital is to suggest additional lab tests need to be performed before the patient gets seen by a doctor. So by launching this kind of appointment system early, and there's an interesting benefit, just like Google search. In the early days, Google search uses a PageRank. But PageRank right now is not really useful because after you have so many people clicking on results and basically using users' action, users' feedback, your ranking algorithm is much, much better. And similarly, right now, our initial accuracy is probably not very high, 76%. But once users start to use the system, suppose we suggest 3 departments to make appointment, they don't make appointment with those 3 departments, they make appointment with the 4th one. Or eventually we know the real diagnosis. And we can have more feedback information to train the algorithm with higher accuracy. So suppose the symptom checking suggests a patient to do a checkup in a year. So let's look at this optical sense. And optical sense, like I said, we have a base here. This is basically Wi-Fi communication. It transmits the information into the cell phone. The cell phone will relay the information to the cloud. And depending on what kind of diseases we like to detect, we can change lenses. And this one is particular for otitis media. Okay. For image analysis, I mean, you are all experts. You may consider this problem is pretty well studied and should be easy to be solved. And initially we work with a local hospital. We say, well, we collected about 1,000 otitis media images. And on the left-hand side, we have 2 normal eardrums. And we have 4 otitis media kind of eardrums. And we collected more and more. So at the end, we have about 1,000. And we say, well, CNN is very powerful. So we put into a convolutional network to see what kind of accuracy we can achieve. So before seeing the results, let's put everything in the context. And a high quality physician, the detection accuracy, according to survey of medical journals, is about 85%. Because otitis media, the symptom can be quite diverse, as you will see in the following pictures. So the accuracy classified by or trained by CNN is only 75%. So this is really not very high. So this was about 2 or 3 years ago. We asked the doctor to say, maybe we should go back to the traditional way. Rather than rely on neural network to learn features, perhaps we should hand engineering features. So we asked the doctor what kind of features we can extract from those images. So the doctor says segmentation, then you probably detecting redness or swelling kind of situations. So we did our segmentation work. We improved accuracy to about 80%. But this is definitely not good enough. And the doctors stopped collaborating with us. So one engineer suggested maybe we should use internet images to try to consider maybe transfer learning, whether transfer learning could work or not. So we have done the following. First of all, we collected about 10 million images from the internet. And those images are not relevant to medicine, just car, objects, and elephant, animals, whatever. And those images are not labels, or you can get labels, but you don't have bounding box with the images. So the first step we did was we go through this kind of coding kind of scheme. Coding everybody is familiar with. Basically, we use a neural net to do coding, and we input the image to generate a code book. Then eventually also using the other neural net to try to return the image to do decoding. So unsupervised learning here is pretty straightforward. After we do encoding, decoding, the cell similarity should be there of the same image. And using a signal and noise ratio, we can quantify similarity here very effectively. So once we have trained a code book, so given an otitis media image, we make it as a linear array, and we use the code book to give us spark coding a new kind of feature vector. And this new feature vector, then we input into CNN and try to use these new feature vectors to do CNN training. The resulting accuracy improved drastically from 80% to 90%. So this is somehow a big surprise. And let me explain why we can achieve this improvement. So let's look at this paper published by Andrew Ng's group. This is about 10 years ago. And this picture shows he was intended to classify 4 different target semantics: faces, cars, elephants, and the chairs. And if you look at the middle layer neurons, they are the parts of the target semantics. So cars, you can see the parts of the cars. And for faces, we see ear and the eyes and nose and so on and so forth. But the critical lesson to learn is the lower layer neurons, they are pretty much similar. They are fundamental features of objects, contour, edges, and so on and so forth. So if we can just borrow the lowest layers from this totally irrelevant set of images, effectively we have all the lower layers neural networks trained, right? So this is, we get this visual cortex-like basis. And how about the middle tier neurons? How can we borrow information from this another source domain? So we use visualization to see how a particular image gets classified into benign, how other images get classified into otitis media. As I said, there are diversified features of otitis media. So we look at what kind of neurons get turned on when a eardrum gets classified to be normal. We look at them like amoeba in a box. And when eardrum get classified into otitis media, hopefully it wouldn't ruin your appetite. You can see red wine and red silk in certain situation, latte and half orange for this particular otitis media, and shell and this another kind of stone. And these neurons got turned on. The idea here is very similar to when we write poetry using, we say, explicit stimuli, right? The sky is as bright or as blue as ocean. And here you say otitis media, certain otitis media symptoms, they are very similar to latte, when latte is with certain kind of milk formation. So this is really interesting. In this particular disease, we happen to be able to borrow information from a source domain. And we also try kind of using transfer learning to analyze cardiovascular signals. So we do have this kind of ECG, two-layer ECG here, and we need to detect different arrhythmia conditions like atrial fibrillation. And unfortunately, there are two challenges. One is the existing data, label data out there is very limited. So there are only two data sets FDA approved. One is from MIT, the other one from Harvard. The total number of label instances, label means bit-to-bit annotation. If a patient is diagnosed with irregular heartbeat, and which heartbeat is the symptom or the sources of diagnosis need to be annotated. And we only have 176 instances. So we try to use acoustic signal speech to conduct transfer learning. But so far, we haven't been able to find a very successful domain to transfer knowledge over. And in the last 3 years, we have done the other way. We say, well, maybe we should just ask physicians to annotate more data. So indeed, we work with a local hospital, and we hire nurses for the physician. And after 3 years, we have annotated another only 300 more instances, because physicians are extremely busy. So this is really a challenge in doing medical research. And not really physicians are lazy, but they are extremely busy. Their time can be extremely valuable. So annotating 300 people, and we try to take advantage of his time by asking the subject, not only laying on the bed, but also moving around. Because nowadays, there are lots of arrhythmia detector put on the wearables. So we consider incorporating motion information into the source data to be critical. So therefore, this data set we consider to be interesting. So we plan to make it public so everybody can share to do further research. So with a device like this tricorder here, and the cost is not very high. And right now, even just covering 15 diseases, the total bill of material cost is under $1,000 US. Suppose you expand the coverage to be 30 or 40 diseases, should be under 10K, right? So this kind of devices can be placed in CVS or 7-Eleven, and a community of people can utilize that. And this is extremely useful or helpful in the developing countries. So this picture shows, suppose we have healthcare cloud, AI cloud, with IoT devices in the local point of care, and a person can be monitored, and the data can be sent to the cloud. And when the cloud detects something abnormal, the person can be alerted. At the same time, the doctor at the remote site also can be informed. And if there's a situation really happen negatively, the doctor can invite the patient to go into a hospital to do further tests. And when the test comes back, and the diagnosis can be performed, and also continuous monitoring can be performed. And this is really critical nowadays because, like I mentioned, we go to hospital, we get prescription, then we pay our prices, and it's over. And for chronic diseases, continuous monitoring is critical for the recovery. And prevention is extremely critical. Myself has suffering from two we call tragedies in the last couple of years. Both my sister-in-law and my father-in-law passed away because of lung disease. When they went to a hospital, they feel discomfort, they went to hospital, already diagnosed as stage 4 lung cancer. But if they could have prevented it, or doing diagnosis or risk assessment much earlier, and the situation can be reversed. Another kind of very common problem in Asia is chronic kidney disease. And chronic kidney disease, when a person feels discomfort, it's already pretty much entering stage 3. And again, stage 3 is not reversible. It's only a matter of time you need to go to stage 4, then eventually pass away. But if we can do early detection in stage 1 or 2, detecting chronic kidney disease, the situation can be reversible. Okay. So I'd like to spend some time to talk about a scalable algorithm behind the tricorder device. We understand the current renaissance of AI is due to two major reasons. One is the scale of data, and the second is the scale of computation. But scale of data is actually not new, right? Scale of data, we talk about big data probably more than 10 years ago. And scale computation, Amazon already has this cloud service available many, many years ago. But why only happened this renaissance about 4 years ago? So my team at Google 10 years ago, we started doing parallel machine learning. Parallel machine learning means there are many interesting mission-critical algorithms like subtle vector machine or frequent item mining. Let me just use this using subtle vector machine as an example because it's a popular algorithm. At the time when we started this project, and our colleagues were not very supportive for reasonable arguments. The first argument is for many applications like search or ads matching, you don't need to use a very expensive algorithm to achieve reasonable performance. And also the second reason is in ads matching, accuracy is very subjective, right? So if I give you ABC rather than CDE, will you be happy or unhappy? So it's really hard. It's very subjective. And in a search result, suppose I say, well, I have a much more complex algorithm, which is superlinear. We can increase search quality by 5%. 5% means every 20 results, I only replace one result. And the user may not care. So the argument at the point is those algorithms, superlinear, can be extremely expensive. And one example is suppose you have 1 billion instances. To process this 1 billion instances using a linear algorithm, let's say it takes 1 minute. But if you use a quadratic algorithm, it would take 1 billion minutes, right? So no corporation would do such kind of investment. So we also found a pattern, say data-driven deep learning in 2011, and Google also ignored it because they say, well, who cares? And interesting enough, at the same time, this is the argument I made. So Google consider it's very costly to use any algorithm which has complexity higher than ON, and they prefer O log n will be much better, right? And there's another argument they made within the corporation. They say, well, you look at this picture. This picture basically is a beauty contest of different machine learning algorithms. On the y-axis is the volume of training data. So this is 2 to the power of 10, 2 to the power of 100, 2 to the power of 1,000. And the y-axis quantifies testing accuracy. So there are 5 different algorithms doing competition here. When the training data volume is very small, one method wins out over here. This method may lose to other algorithms when we increase the training data size. So there are 2 interesting lessons. One is a lot of researchers, including myself, we publish data in this area. But this doesn't mean our algorithm is much better. If we increase the training data size, our algorithm could be inferior. The second interesting result here is argued by Google was, okay, when the data volume is large enough, like big data in the big data regime, then all algorithms performs about the same. The accuracy difference is only about 5%. So why not using a very cheap algorithm? Because we just want to be able to timely getting results. So that really makes a lot of sense. But this also at the same time we observe this deep learning pipeline. And we argue deep learning was not very successful since 1980 to about year 2000 was because if you look at a typical neural nets, the number of parameters are quite sizable. So let's use AlexNet as an example. This is kind of afterthought, but let's use this is a very successful AlexNet as an example. How many parameters are there on AlexNet? So AlexNet has convolution layers, and they have kind of fully connected layers. The total number of parameters is about 300,000. So let's recall before year 2012, how many data sets out there consist of more than 100,000 images so people can do experiment with? Probably 0. There are quite a few UCI data sets with only a limited number of training instances. So using linear algebra to do an analogy, so if you have 20 variables, you only have 10 equations, you cannot solve those variables, right? So if you have 300,000 variables, but we only have, let's say, 10,000 images, every image basically is a combination of features or combination of variables. So we don't really have sufficient training data to solve the variables. Of course, the accuracy is pretty low. So around the time we sponsor Fei Li to do this ImageNet competition. So we sponsor her team with $260,000 US. And then I think the results was extremely promising. You see that in 2012, AlexNet shows the error rate can be drastically reduced from 28% to 16% on a benchmark data set. And from that moment on, we can see the error has been reduced to less than about 3%. So what kind of lesson we have learned from the past? Actually, two things. One was, once people start to see the accuracy can be drastically improved, people are willing to invest in hardware. So if you look at support vector machine itself as an example, the bottleneck is to invert this kernel matrix. And similarly, if you look at deep learning. Deep learning, we have a matrix in the middle. Suppose we would like to use the Hessian method to take advantage of second order derivative or gradient. Then we have to be able to invert up matrix. Inverting matrix is quadratically expensive. But if we have approximate method to factorize the matrix using like Kronecker factorization or incomplete Cholesky, we can probably reduce the complexity from n squared to np. And p can be a square root of n. Right, so suppose we assuming we have 1 billion training instances, P can be 32K. So 32K, suppose we use 32 GPU, every GPU has 1,000 core, and this actually can solve the problem. So because the accuracy has drastically improved, and corporations start to have incentive to invest in hardware to improve accuracy. The significance of ImageNet and AlphaGo shows us a pipeline that can develop IQ equivalent to 300 machine, like the AlphaGo itself. But let's come back to revisit our image healthcare domain. Healthcare suffers from not so big data situation, right? So I already illustrated using the Untitled media as example. And in a small data learning regime, and these are the methods people have been employed in the last 10 or 20 years. Dimension reduction has not been shown extremely effective. And transfer learning can be effective only the source domain, the knowledge can be borrowed to the target domain. And recently, starting from 2014, a researcher, Goodfellow, proposed a model called GAN, Generative Adversarial Network. And this model, I think most of people probably are really familiar with. So the idea is, suppose I have a generator network, and I have some real data, and I have this discriminator network, which would like this generator network to generate some fake data, which the discriminator cannot tell, right? So if you can generate data, the discriminated data considered to be real, then this GAN pipeline is considered to be very successful. And over the last 4 years, many researchers have looked into the problem in theory and also in practice. And because of time constraint, I'm not going to get into details, but one major criticism is if the two distribution, the real data distribution and the generated data distribution in the last pictures, they do not overlap. So let's go back to the last picture. If these two networks, their distribution do not overlap, then there's no gradient can be helpful to improving this generator network. So last 2 years, there have been quite a few enhancements to the GAN model. And you can probably just take a picture. There are quite a few papers you can take a look. But we still consider this particular model not very adequate. And this is, there are some examples to illustrate why. So this is an early example, people using GAN to generate more digits to do digit classification. And these are synthesized digits. And you can say, well, this is 1 and this is 4. But people may not argue, in reality, will human write 4 in such a way, right? Probably not relevant. This is not a relevant question for this kind of digit recognition. And last year, a paper published, and they used this kind of advanced GAN model. The argument is this advanced model, considering gradient kind of vanishing and so on and so forth, they can, in this particular data set, Barron data set, they can generate more images like Barron. The semantics is more like Barron. Compared with other methods initially, they probably generate some noise, right? The argument I made here is, if you look at this furniture kind of image, if I move the pillow around, if I tilt the bed a little bit, if I add in additional free furniture, even I pour latte onto the bed, it's still Barron, right? It's okay, it doesn't matter. And there was a problem we tried to solve last year. This was to identify different types of strokes, hemorrhagic and also ischemic. And a stroke patient need to get through a CT scan as soon as possible. So people probably understand the notion of golden 3 hours, right? If the treatment cannot be performed in 3 hours, then the symptoms may not be reversible. But because of these, there are two types of strokes, so the doctor need to identify which types. If it's a ischemic, then you need to remove the blockage. If it's a bleeding situation, the treatment is totally different. So the SOP right now is you don't drive to the hospital because you are wasting maybe 1 hour and a half. You call the ambulance. Ambulance arrive at home. The ambulance would probably have this CT equipment taking a picture right away, but radiologists may be asleep, right? So at this time, we really require some kind of AI technology can classify quickly which kind of stroke has happening. So once we can identify, then once the patient rushes into the hospital, treatment can be performed in a timely fashion. And UC Irvine is proud of being the shortest time to really give patient proper treatment and in this kind of scenario. So we are facing a problem where we don't really have a lot of training data. So can GAN be very helpful in this scenario? The answer is not really, because if we put this entire data set into GAN to synthesize some new data, then we get data with some redness. But the redness may not be on the blood vessels. The redness may be on nerves, maybe on brain tissues. So when the GAN start to generate data, they don't really understand semantics. For barium, it's okay, because barium, you can have a lot of variety. You can still consider that setting as a barium. But for medical data, there are a lot of constraints. There are nerve system here, there are blood vessels, and even you put redness onto other blood vessels locations. Those blood vessels may never bleed, right? So definitely we have a lot of work to be done to kind of mitigate a small data problem in medicine. So this is a good discussion to segue into precision surgery. And I don't have time to get into precision medicine today, but because your primary interest of this team is imagery, so let's get into precision surgery. HTC and also Facebook, right, and Microsoft, recently I think there's a renaissance of virtual reality equipment. And we work with a partner we heavily invested called Surgical Theater to try to convert CT, MRI, MR images into a virtual reality kind of setting. So traditionally, when a surgeon prepare for a surgery, look at those CT scans or look at MRIs, they have to conceptualize a patient's brain on top of those 3D kind of imagery. It takes a surgeon about 10 or 20 years to be well trained to have this kind of conceptual model. And brain surgery is quite complex if the plan is not done properly. This is just a couple examples. So this is a potential path into removing this tumor. But before removing tumor, the surgeon need to also be aware of all the nerves and also blood vessels, because you don't want to cut blood vessels or removing nerves without redundancy. In this example, there's a cloud of nerve cells here, and assuming those nerve cells are for motor. So if the surgery coming from this direction, and even this person's brain tumor can be removed, this person can probably never move. So therefore, a more productive path in this particular situation may be coming from the other side of the head, from the ear, right? And another consideration is how much brain tumor should be removed. And if we only remove a small portion, then the situation may reoccur. If we remove too much, and it's probably damaging the healthy brain cells. So a surgical procedure also can consider, instead of removing the entire brain tumor, we can remove a partial of the brain tumor, but put a clip on the blood vessel supplying oxygen into the brain tumor. So this can cause the brain tumor to die out. So because I'm really not an expert in neurosurgeon, so it's good to play a video to let the expert to speak their experience. So the system has deployed in the US in at least 4 hospitals in the beginning of last year. Stanford is one of them. And UCLA, Mount Sinai Hospital, also Cleveland Hospital are the other few.
They actually have to operate. It's called surgical theater. To prepare pilots, flight simulators were developed so they could practice before a critical mission. Now, this 100-year-old technology has inspired an entirely new idea that could save lives.
It's just amazing to see every little opening in the skull where a nerve goes through.
At the University of California, Los Angeles, neurosurgeons are slipping on virtual reality headsets to go inside their patients' brains. Dr. Neil Martin is the chairman of UCLA's Department of Neurosurgery.
We had two goals in a complex operation. Take care of the abnormality, remove a tumor, save all the normal structures, the nerves, the blood vessels, the brain tissue itself.
He's developing this virtual technology with
Retired Israeli soldiers, Modi Avasar and Alan Jerry,
They actually designed the flight simulator for the F-16. I mean, I thought, oh, wow, that is like the most technically complex thing you could do.
How did you get from flight simulation to virtual brain surgery?
We allow the pilot to fly through the ceiling of tomorrow's mission, and that's exactly what we're allowing a brain surgeon.
We develop a medical device that converts patient-specific imagery into a patient-specific three-dimensional model.
The VR brain model is made by taking standard 2D MRI scans of the brain and stacking them to form a three-dimensional model.
Virtual reality gives you that understanding of your entire 180 or even 360 degree anatomy that is impossible to get with any other technique. In 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I can see the critical issues that I've got in mind that have to be dealt with. And historically, this took 10 or 20 years of experience to turn two-dimensional black and white x-rays into a three-dimensional mental image.
and you fly around inside the brain, moving past brain tissue, nerves, and blood vessels by simply moving your head.
So are you creating this 3D model for every time we get a new scan?
We'll be doing images in the future to make sure that we see no sign of any tumor growing back.
It helps a lot to be able to see what that looks like.
with surgical theater, the surgeon is able to practice until he finds the best way to stop an aneurysm in its tracks.
So this is impossible during surgery because you'd have to remove the entire brain to get that perspective. I can walk around it and really get a fantastic feel, a real feel for exactly where the structures are.
During it, they can put the headset back on to reorient themselves.
Here's an example. Right here on the image, I can see the carotid artery going through the margin of the tumor. Rather than have that all of a sudden appear as I am removing tumor, I'll know exactly when I'm going to encounter it.
Dr. Martin has used the scans of former patients to practice using the virtual technology.
The surgeons of the future, the trainees now, are going to be able to look at an entire library of complicated cases and do those cases surgically in a virtual sense to prepare and short-circuit the training.
With the HTC Vive, you get virtual reality. It allows us to better tailor our operation.
We're trying to help even the most gifted surgeon to be able to do what the most gifted basketball player does, football player, golfer, jet pilot, anybody rehearse for the critical mission.
So I think the surgeon probably speak much better or much more precisely than a non-medical expert. So let's move into some possible future projects and future work. So we have considered there are at least a couple avenues to extend this work. The first of all, right now, surgical theater product covers only brain, but next to logical organs to cover will be spine and heart. And also, if we can combine AI technology with VR, and it's possible to do automatic surgery planning. And the surgery planning right now takes a surgeon about 6 hours to complete. And in situations in, let's say, China, and there are tens of thousands of cases a year, but only have limited number of surgeons. And surgical planning, spending a short time to do effective planning is extremely critical. So suppose we have lots of medical records, and some with effective results, some with not so effective results, and AI can come into place to generate a template for the surgeon to make a much faster plan. And eventually, this is maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, so you can have AR-guided kind of surgery. Okay, let's move into my conclusion here. So in the last about 5 years, and we started to really invest into this healthcare. And for precision medicine, the basic, I didn't cover today, the basic mission is to be able to analyze a lot of data. So this is a schema diagram produced by Harvard University. Medical data can come from different sources. There are so many different types, and you can find this diagram on the internet. And we have developed many different algorithms to process different aspects of the medical data, healthcare data. At the same time, we have to collect data, right? Not only just utilizing existing data, also like to collect data. And Tricorder is definitely the way to go. And an interesting example, Ramesh Jain, the UC Irvine professor, gave about a couple of days ago was every day the amount of data we collect from our car to send to the cloud is humongous. But how much data actually collect out of body today? Probably zero. So this should be changed. And maybe a device like Tricorder should be the right way to go. And this is just a self-plugin. We won major prizes last April. And our paper got cited by a Berkeley group, so that's very good. And Surgical Theater is our good partner because we are the major investor on the company. And because of our ability to work with neurosurgeons, we are able to conduct conferences to be able to penetrate into local hospitals. Because initially, as a cell phone company, HTC probably people know about, we manufacture cell phone, early Android phones. When we go to hospital, people will say, well, why you, right? But working with neurosurgeons, a neurosurgeon will be building credibility. We start to be able to work with local hospitals. So we have lots of partners and doing various IRB for different kind of symptoms and different diseases. And hopefully we will be very productive in a few years. So we coined our company DeepQ, and Deep stands for deep architecture, deep learning, or this problem is very deep, like iceberg. And Q stands for quest for cure. And so far, we only very much scratched the surface of the iceberg. We still have a lot of work to be done. So thank you very much.
Time for questions. Go ahead.
I'm curious, what's the business model with the Tricorder? The reason I'm asking is that about 7 years ago, we started a company, DigiSite, for telemedicine ophthalmology, and everything was built around smartphone, basically for home diagnostics of vision problems, photography, and that. And patients loved it, physicians liked it, and payers, and eventually nobody wanted to pay.
Yes.
Nobody wanted to pay for the service. So I wonder what's the business model? Who is going to pay for this?
Right, we have similar challenges. There are 3 challenges we are facing right now. One is the intellectual properties in this box do not all belong to a company. There are many companies own different intellectual properties. Number 2, manufacturing these kind of devices is not like you can upload a new app onto the cell phone. Every time you change your classifier, you have to go to FDA. It's really time consuming. And number 3, once, let's say 95% accuracy, it's a great accuracy, but you have this 5% liability. So to us, we have no plan to commercialize this box in the developed countries. Right. And for business model, we did talk to insurance companies. And some insurance company has proposed one interesting scenario. They say, well, for new babies, maybe the first baby in the family, and parents seem to be more panicked than probably senior parents. So they often will send their babies to emergency rooms at nighttime. And every visit is $2,000 US. But they consider if you have such devices, insurance company willing to pay the family to buy such a device. And this device can be home guided by a nurse. And the nurse will instruct the parents to probably do otitis media or fever detection, and maybe would defer emergency visit into a regular visit. That would save the insurance company $2,000 minus $200, $1,800, which can cover the bus already. One visit saving can cover the cost of the bus. This is the only business model we heard about. But because of trouble of going through FDA, and because of trouble of this IP, and also liability potentially, I don't think commercializing this in the developed countries can be productive. On the other hand, developing countries are really eager to deploy these kind of devices because they have nothing right now.
I want to jump in with a question, if
Yes.
you don't mind. So one of the themes of your talk was more data. I mean, AlexNet did well because they had
Yes.
more data than anybody else, right? And then you ended by saying not very much data in
Yes.
medical.
Mhm.
Can you talk a bit about what HTC might be doing or what other places that you've seen around are doing for collecting and annotating and storing and sharing data?
I think I talked to quite a few companies in the past 2 or 3 years. I think every company has the same dilemma of because of privacy situation, because in the US a lot of data actually are in analog, and also people probably go to different foundations, they don't share data, so you don't really have a large amount of data can be collected. That's number one dilemma. Even you can collect the data has to be annotated. So like I mentioned about this ECG data, you can collect ECG data using Apple Watch, but if the data has not been annotated, you don't have this bit-to-bit annotation. Even you can argue your classification accuracy is good, but you cannot interpret why this person has arrhythmia. You cannot pass FDA test. So I think there are two things, right? One is data collection. In Taiwan seems to be famous about IC, but Taiwan has this universal insurance for over 30 years. So we have collected a lot of data, but again, for privacy reason, we cannot just utilizing those data. We have to go through IRB process, and so the process has been extremely painful. So even like otitis media, initially we only have 1,000 data. Right now we have probably 20,000, still in a small data regime. So when we talk about big data, probably close to probably 500,000 to 1 million, we can call big data. Most of application we just do not have that.